Hey folks, in today's beta studies for Resto Druids and their DPS, we are looking at Legendaries, or the legendary effects that you can apply to gear. Which is going to be the best? Let's find out and get started. To begin with, we'll briefly talk about how to get a legendary. You'll need to progress through the Torghast quest until you unlock the Rune Carver, and then you'll need an item crafted by a profession, in our case a leatherworker or jewel crafter, soul dust from Torghast runs, and that's what will probably delay you, stat scrolls from the scribe to apply stats, and then legendary effect memory itself, which you can acquire as if it was a drop from various locations. With that done, let's talk about how many legendaries you can acquire, and which ones we will immediately discount. Druids have access to 28 legendary powers. That's 8 neutral, 4 per spec, and then 4 which are designed for all specs. We will immediately discount the 16 spec ones. While a feral one will work for cat weaving, it just won't compete with what the others can offer. Resto ones are of course viable, shout out to the Swiftman one, which has some DPS potential in basically causing you to spend less time healing, but here we will focus purely on the others. Which also means discounting again 6 of the 8 neutrals. Of these 6, one of them lets you cast on the move, one of them explodes enemies that you kill, one of them is exclusively for the Maw, one of them is for Torghast, one of them for PvP, and one of them just for fighting elites it seems. That leaves us with 8 options. Just like the conduits, I'll be working off a hypothetical Mythic Plus run, treating the usage numbers as similar to now, as without major changes we will likely be DPSing in the same style, that being a heavy use of Sunfire and Moonfire, with either cat weaving or owl weaving to fill in any spare gaps. We'll start with the neutrals and Echoes of Eonar, a legendary that rather than buffing you, buffs a nearby ally, increasing their damage and healing by 10% for 15 seconds, and this procs about twice a minute. While numbers are obviously in flux, it's safe to assume that a DPS character should be able to do more than double your numbers, even more so if they're aware of this buff and able to make use of it. This legendary gets stronger the less time you have to DPS as well, as its damage is not dependent on you, it's dependent on your group. Assuming a DPS does over double your damage, this is setting a high benchmark of over 600,000 damage over our hypothetical dungeon. Despite these positives, it does lack any ability to help you heal. It relies on your DPS players recognising that you are using it, and loses power if used in raids when you could buff other healers. A high bar set, and the other neutral legendary does not hit it. Judgment of the Arbiter procs damage when you deal damage, and also arcs damage between other players with this legendary effect. Except, no one will ever use this. So on raw numbers, this is 7 times weaker than Eonar. Add to that, no healing benefit, and this is a no-go. Onto the Druid legendaries, and we start with Draught of the Deep Focus. Moonfire, Rip, Rake, and Rejuvenation's power is increased by 30% if they are only applied to a single target. A strong effect, but the restriction is just so painful. Multi-dotting is still going to be better even with this, so you'll need a very precise single target boss where you want this, and even then, Echoes of Eonar will pull ahead. You would need to maintain all 3 of these dots 100% to compete, and that's impossible as an owl and near impossible as a cat. Lykara's Fleeting Glimpse causes you to perform a free ability every 45 seconds while in combat. For healing it is Wild Growth, Roar in travel form, Barkskin in bear, but let's face it, the ones we care about is Starfall in Moonkin and Primal Wrath, that's an AoE rip, in cat form. This is much more of an AoE focus, so these low figures should certainly be upped a bit for multi-target, as it will scale better on AoE than most others. Even so, you would need a constant supply of 5 enemies to keep up with Eonar, and we can assume that Eonar scales with AoE as most DPS players will. And then there are the downsides, that you need to be in the right form. Mistime this, and suddenly you're wild growthing when you popped into humanoid just to Sunfire. Ultimately, procs like this need to be powerful with how hard they can be to manage, and the numbers just don't compete. Next up is one I've talked about before, Oath of the Elder Druid. This increases the effect of your affinity passives, that's 75% extra healing from Ysera's gift, and either 75% extra added to the bonus cat speed or Moonkin's ranged. Now remember, that is 75% of the bonus, not your actual figures. Besides the very minor healing increase, The main reason for this is the 10 seconds of Heart of the Wild every minute. We know from the Heart of the Wild video that it's a 30% damage increase during its duration for Moonkins and slightly less than that for cats. So in a perfect world, that being where you're using this every minute and you are able to spend all 10 seconds dealing damage, this puts out good numbers, but still half as good as ENR. A minor healing buff does not outweigh that. Now there is the argument that during those 10 seconds you could do more than your average damage. 2 of the Covenant abilities you can use in every other window, and the Necrolords will be active for every single one. But we also have to assume that DPS players would also be able to do the same in ENR's window. I just don't see the numbers getting close. So 5 legendaries down and ENR is queen. But here is the real rival. Circle of Life and Death. Your dots occur 25% quicker and HOTS 15%. Instantly, of course, there is a healing benefit, and a stronger one at that. But what about the damage? It's important to remember that 25% quicker is not exactly 25% extra damage. You will need to reapply Sunfire, Moonfire, Rake and Rip more often, and that means more globals that are not used on Shreds, Swipes and Ferocious Bite. Yet, Rip ticks so quickly that you're realistically not going to be using Ferocious Bite if you throw in a few heals in between. Even so, removing the damage that you lose by not using as many fillers, we finally have a number that, while it does not rival ENR's 600,000 plus, it comes the closest. That is with Feral Affinity. For Balance Affinity, since Moonfire and Sunfire do not cause extra damage, you lose out on the Rake and Rip damage. Combined with Oath's stronger aspect for balance, it might threaten Circle for second place, but the healing benefit from Circle is so good I just don't see it. So, in conclusion, Echoes of ENR? It is the strongest for DPS, made even better if you aren't actually doing as much damage yourself, but it's a lack of healing benefits and reliance on others helping make use of it that may hurt it in some people's eyes. To be clear, I believe the group damage is more important than any individual players. I'd rather have others in my group do more damage and I did less, than just, increasing my own personal DPS. But for the fact that it helps healing a fair bit and works well in solo content, I think Circle is just a solid first craft. That is, except it drops from the raid. The Stone Legion Generals. The penultimate boss. So acquiring that memory may not be as quick as you'd like. So what about ENR's? That is from Rep, the Wild Hunt in Ardenweald. Revered in 2 weeks should be doable. If you can, I'd craft Circle first, as an all-round good legendary, but if you can't, ENR will do some good work for you. And if you don't fancy ENR, there's always the Swiftmend healing one. As for their slots, Circle can go into Headpiece or Ring, while ENR's can go onto a Waist, Wrist or Ring. That means either a Leatherworker or a Jewel Crafter will be sufficient for both. As for the Cat vs Owl, finally, Cat wins a round, as it benefits from Circle much more. Owl likely still uses Circle, if you aren't going to use ENR, but Cat wins this round, and obviously ENR is equal for both of them. Next time it's looking at the Covenants, their abilities and Soulbinds, and now that we know what the best conduits are and legendaries, we'll be able to add those into the mix. Those will be split into their own videos, so Necrolords will be up first. See you there, and thanks for watching.